Hello, welcome everyone. It's really great to be here. My name is Iain Gulland, Chief Executive of Airways Scotland. I'm really excited about today. Just to get started, apparently according to my Strava, I did my fastest time on the bike this morning getting to work. I'm obviously very excited to be here, either that or a moderate to strong tailwind. But maybe use that as a metaphor for today in terms of our circular economy journey. Time to ride the tailwind of momentum we have here in Scotland and abroad and accelerate our activities. So we all definitely are much more aware of the impact that we're having in terms of climate change. Around 4/5 of Scotland's footprint comes from the products and materials we manufacture, use and throw away. This year alone, we produced a report that our material flow account that stated that the average Scot consumes 18.4 tonnes of materials every year. That's equivalent to about 50 kilograms per week on average. So the evidence is clear. Consumption in Scotland is unsustainably high, and it's likely to be a similar picture in other countries around the world. The circular economy is no longer a concept. It's a demonstrable solution to our overconsumption problem, and as a result, climate change. And it's happening right here in Scotland and internationally so. But yeah, when we talk about our net zero targets, not just here in Scotland, but in other countries, the focus tends to be restricted to decarbonisation of the energy system, the shift to renewables and electric vehicles, etc. Surely we need to shift incentives in the economy to encourage businesses and individuals to use fewer resources, addressing both supply, circular products and business models, and demand individual behaviour. So today is all about that very subject. It's time to talk about consumption. So I am delighted in this first session to be able to start with two very special guests to discuss what is next for us on our circular economy journey here in Scotland, and how we are shaping up with respect to other countries around the world. This is all, after all, a global journey that we're on. It's not about somebody winning a race. We all have to get there together. So I would absolutely be delighted to introduce Lorna Slater, the new Minister for the Circular Economy here in Scotland. I really couldn't have imagined the fact that we would have such a minister when we set out in our circular economy journey just a few years ago. So welcome, Lorna. And I will also like to introduce Jocelyn Blériot from the MacArthur Foundation, an organisation I'm sure everybody has heard about, certainly an organisation who inspired us here in Scotland on that circular economy journey many years ago, and they work with governments all around the world, cities, administrations, investors and individual businesses to further promote and connect circular economy practices. You'll also know that MacArthur herself has been invited to sit on the First Minister's Environment Council, which has just recently been established to help Scotland go further in terms of its ambition around the environment, both in terms of climate change and tackling biodiversity loss, which are both crises that are intrinsically linked. So it'll be good to hear what Joss thinks are some key areas for acceleration there. But if I may, I'd like to start with our Minister. Lorna Slater, welcome. And I obviously thought as a way of introduction, you're just in the door, as I say, a few weeks now, but it might be useful just to get a sort of a sense of where you think the circular economy fits in Scotland's net zero ambitions and tackling climate change. What's the prominence of that, and particularly referencing the concept of consumption? How do we tackle it? Over to you, Lorna.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you for having me on today. It's absolutely been a struggle in terms of being a new minister and having such an exciting portfolio for tackling the climate crisis. So within my portfolio, I have both biodiversity and the circular economy, which I feel are in some ways the kind of neglected siblings of the climate crisis. We talk, as we should, a lot about reducing fossil fuel emissions and a lot about reducing our carbon outputs and net zero and all of that is very important in terms of the amount of and our waste crisis are part of the whole puzzle. And we've all seen devastating pictures of sea mammals with plastic wrapped around them. Turtles eating cellophane wrappers, beaches covered in plastic waste. And so the production of plastic in particular by our economy is so very damaging. This almost, when it first was invented, must have seen a sort of magical light, waterproof glass production. So that's part of why it's such a cheap material to use, and has become so ubiquitous in our society. Unfortunately, it's now caused that problem everywhere, and of litter and this kind of one-off, one-use, use it and waste it, that is so frustrating, I think, to all of us. In particular, you go to the supermarket and you come home with piles of plastic. Everything you buy is wrapped in plastic, and spending a huge amount of our economic resource as a country to create things that we know will only be used for a few seconds and then will be thrown away. And that is, it's a fundamental problem to how our economy works, that we are essentially wasting a lot of our energy and resources, our labor, the materials that we could be using in more productive ways. Just to throw them away is such a waste. So in terms of tackling consumption, I think we need to think about what we consume and how we consume it. And rather than spending a huge proportion of our gross domestic product creating things that we don't need, that will only be used once for a few minutes, when we have so many desperate needs not being met, people not being cared for, infrastructure in decline, we're using resources in a very wasteful way. So one of the stories I think we want to tell about the future, and I think is absolutely true, is that the future has so many wonderful opportunities in it. If we weren't so wasteful, we could be doing productive and useful things with those resources. And this is, I think, the great story about the circular economy. The circular economy already employs a lot of people, and I think it has the potential to employ many more. It's part of the story of improving our environment, both in terms of litter and in terms of our quality of life, focusing our energy and resources on those things that really matter. And this is going to be a fundamental and transformational change to how we view society. And to be honest, I think a lot of young people already get it. They talk about wanting to live meaningful lives and have meaningful jobs and focus on what's really important: family, friends, experiences, learning, creating, rather than just owning and buying and consuming. So I think there is a values shift that is happening, and the more that happens, for the environment.
Okay, I just want to just reflect, your sound does break up a bit there, Lorna. I don't know if that's...
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm on a data connection. I don't have, because of the building I'm in, I don't have a Wi-Fi connection in this building. I'm really sorry.
That's okay. I think yeah, I mean, it is, we're picking it up. There's just bits of it that are a bit delayed. So I guess as a minister coming in, have you, I mean, obviously I've heard some of your speeches in the last couple of weeks and some of the podcasts you've done, and obviously you absolutely have a sense of the circular economy, and the potential for it is really self-evident in what you say. I guess part of this, as the new minister for circular economy, have you had a chance to look at other parts of the world even to see what others are doing, or is it very much a sense of what you see happening in Scotland, or is there other areas that are inspiring you on this journey?
Well, I was certainly very lucky to do some work before I was a minister in Sweden in 2020. So I was part of a project building a tidal turbine, and we built the pitching hubs in Sweden. And they have an excellent deposit return scheme, something like what we are going to have in Scotland. And it was great to see people come to the supermarket with big bags of plastic bottles and so on, and they would queue up for the machine, and you pop your bottles in the machine, and everyone has a bit of a chat. It's very social, it's very normal. And in the same way that we've all gotten used to bringing our own bags to the supermarket, in Sweden they bring bags full of plastic bottles to the supermarket, and for each bottle they can either get money back, or they can donate to charity, or they can get a wee ticket which they can then spend in the supermarket. And this is a really effective mechanism that lots of countries have implemented for for implementing that circular economy, for making sure that we bring back those things would otherwise go to waste through recycling and reuse systems. And that is normal in many countries.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So maybe it's a good place to bring Jocelyn then to talk a little bit more about some of what's happening around the world in terms of the circular economy, you know, because sometimes in Scotland we do very much concentrate on what's happening here and the activities that we're involved in. It'd be good to get a sense of who do you think is leading in the world if we were to go out again and look at the Swedens of this world. Who is it that we should be looking at? Josh, welcome.
Thank you very much, Iain, and it's great to meet Minister Slater as well. And before I go out of Scotland and give you an international look, I think it's important to reflect and celebrate on the fact that Scotland does have a Minister for the Circular Economy, which is probably something that when we started the foundation, we voiced as a potential pipe dream or an objective. Wouldn't it be great if? And there we are, and it's happened. So it's fantastic. So let's celebrate that first and foremost. I think the international dimension is very interesting because it moves in on two different dimensions, I would say. The first one is implementation, and we see more and more implementation of circular economy around the world. Of course, starting with the countries that were first to look at the issue, which are frankly China and the European Union. So now Circular Economy Action Plan that was adopted in March last year is starting to be visible on the ground when it comes to initiatives such as the Sustainable Products Initiative, the Farm to Fork Initiative. All of these things are starting to trickle down and be translated into law. We know that France has adopted a circular economy law. Finland, all these countries are really enacting those strategies at the moment. And of course, there's the private sector side of things, which is showing massive uptake of the idea. Now, the other dimension is that it is becoming an international topic. If you look at the creation of the Global Alliance for Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, which is an initiative by 2 UN bodies and the European Commission. If you look at the Latin American and Caribbean Circular Economy Coalition, if you look at the African Circular Economy Alliance, the dialogue really is global now. And it is also happening outside of the natural habitat of the circular economy, which was the environmental ministries and waste management agencies. I was on a panel on a side event of the UN General Assembly a couple of weeks ago. And for the first 25 minutes, no one spoke about waste management. It was all circular economy. And that's a first, really is a sign of a conversation evolving. And finally, the importance of circular economy is more and more recognized when it comes to the climate discussion. We know that about 35% of countries that have submitted nationally determined contributions, have mentioned circular economy. It's still very embryonic, and we need to unpack what that means. In some cases, it's just a mention. We also see the conversation popping up at the WTO, and it is now a regular feature of WTO conversations. Circular economy and trade is a real active topic. And as we go into 2022 and the COP15 biodiversity in Kunming, the link between circular economy and biodiversity is also going to be more and more acknowledged and understood. So I would say there's action on the ground, especially for the countries who have been looking at this for a while. But also the good news is that the conversation is really becoming global.
Yeah, no, that's really heartening to hear. And yeah, as somebody who's obviously followed a lot of this over the years, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Every year, you know, there's more and more, as you say, it's a global conversation now. It was very possibly restricted in the early stages to just what's happening in Europe, and now it is, yeah, across the world. I think I was going to pick up, and maybe just going back to our minister, because there's something around how it has shifted away from the kind of environmental sphere into the economic sphere. And I'm always very much aware of, sometimes even here in Scotland, we do have those two conversations going on. We look at the circular economy in terms of waste, you know, and almost what to do with our resources at the end of life. And then there's this other conversation around innovation, product development, economic opportunities in terms of jobs. And sometimes I worry there are two separate conversations happening in two different rooms, and they're not all in the same place. And if we're all in the same room, it either gets dominated by waste or it gets dominated by something else. And it's interesting you say that, from other conversations that you're involved in. I just wonder, asking the minister, how do we make sure, or is there things that we could learn from Jocelyn's experience? How can we make sure that we don't have those two conversations, that they are very much joined up and we don't create any tensions between, actors in the field?
Well, I think there's always going to be some tensions between the actors in the field, but at the moment, I think those are unbalanced because we have this linear economy where people produce a single use. We use them, and then we expect the taxpayer to deal with that. It's like, so I've made profit, I've made my money, but you, the taxpayer, you, the local authority, you have to deal with the waste that I've produced, this item that I've created, that I've made my money on, now the taxpayer has to get rid of. And that's unfair. That's a burden on the taxpayer for something we didn't ask for. I didn't ask for my goods to come wrapped in all this stuff. And we can't expect individual consumers to change a whole system. So what we need to do is this extended producer responsibility. And I know we're looking at this in the UK because it's a UK-wide one, but I'm sure countries around the world of saying, well, company X, you've produced this bit of plastic, you also have to deal with that, or we will have to tax you for that, because it's not fair to ask the taxpayer who didn't ask for this and didn't make money from it to get rid of it. We have to, you made it, you have to get rid of it. So this extended producer responsibility, those who produce it loop, in that people are saying, goodness, this is costing us a lot of money to get rid of. Why don't we make less packaging? Why don't we use standard packaging or packaging from materials, or better yet, let's design many, many years. So I think that's what we have to do. When we say circular economy, it's about closing that loop, that it's totally unfair at the moment that our overburdened local authorities who have the responsibility to deal with
Slowing up quite a bit now.
social care, children's education, are actually having to clean up after these big corporations.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's fair to say, and I think that whole idea of system thinking is at the heart of circular economy. I think even in the early days, people thought circular economy was a kind of industrial sector. There'd be a group of companies doing circular things, and they would just fit into the kind of industrial model. But actually, it is a system thinking, and the challenge for doing that is not just about who pays for the current system, but it is actually how do we change the way the whole system works. And even the waste, the waste industry or the waste system is to some extent, because of it's predicated by environmental controls and regulation. It is a linear system. It is about how do you manage the pipe in the most efficient and effective way in terms of pollution control. But how do we actually change that is probably one of the challenges that we all face, and disrupting what is a very effective system, particularly in terms of environmental protection here in Scotland. So I wonder, Josh, picking on you, is that how do these two conversations, how are they coming together at a kind of global level, or are people really recognizing this is a system that dynamic that needs to be taken on board rather than just tweaking what we're already doing?
Well, the conversation is certainly moving upstream, and that's the good news. And as Minister Slater was saying, it's about what we put on the market. Really, is elimination of toxicity and pollution from the outset means that we negate or displace the need for cleanup systems that are a burden to municipalities, governments, but also society as a whole. And you do away with those costs associated with cleaning up. You don't have compound toxicity because, of course, if you're going to close the loop, you better clean it in the first place. Otherwise, that toxicity amalgamates, compounds, and becomes even worse. So the feedstock nature of the conversation is really important. What gets put on the market? What type of product, what nature of materials, and what volumes as well. And that goes hand in hand with the conversation about downstream and extended producer responsibility, of course. And this is really interesting because we see that more and more that conversation is being joined up, and the starting point becomes the upstream measures, what we put on the market, how do we select the right materials, but also how we deal with them. And rather than thinking about consumption as we're used to doing it, it's more about use. It's more about how do we keep those materials in use, the value of them, the embedded energy, the embedded materials, because of course, if you keep them in use, well, what you don't waste, you don't need to replace. And therefore you do away with the negative externalities associated with extraction, with production, etc., etc. And then the other bit of the puzzle is, of course, the impact on biodiversity. The less you extract, the more room you have for biodiversity, the less we put on the market things that can be damaging for the environment, toxic and polluting, the better ecosystems can thrive and regenerate. So all of that, as you say, Iain, it is really a system question, and it's complex and it's daunting. But I think that breaking it down in terms of the three principles of the circular economy of eliminating, circulating, and regenerating really makes it easy to understand. And that notion is being picked up a lot. We've seen, for instance, in China that has had a promotion law on circular economy since 2008. For the past 4 years, the focus has been on eco-design and EPR. So really upstream, and how do we deal with the consequences of what we have at the moment, bearing in mind that, of course, EPR is a transition measure. If we only put the right things on the market and if we capture them, that's fine. We don't need to clean up and to pay for that.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of that, yeah, kind of strategic level is the direction of travel. And I think you're right to point that out. I guess going back to an earlier point that the Minister was talking about in terms of consumers and individuals and society. I mean, how do we engage with them about the consumption debate? I mean, you know, because obviously there's a sense that we're just telling people you have to stop buying stuff, but actually what we're suggesting is, yeah, we need to reduce our overall consumption, but actually we just need to consume smarter. We need to think about, you know, instead of buying things, whether we rent things, whether we borrow things, whether we share things, and that's still a massive challenge. Is communicating it in a way that absolutely the high level, the you know, the kind of strategic level, you know, in terms of administrations and government understand all of that, but for the public, it's still quite a challenge because the system, or whatever you want to call it, you know, we're still encouraged to go out and buy things. We're still encouraged to buy the latest this or the latest that. I just wonder whether there's a sense from you, Minister, about how do we have that conversation, or do you think it's happening already? You mentioned young people particularly kind of on board on this, but how do we break that almost? Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, we're going through a recovery, you know, we've gone through economic recoveries before. There's always a sense that we need to go out and buy, we need to go out into the high street and buy lots of things to stimulate the economy again. And that's ultimately what we don't want to see in terms of the environment, because of the impact it's having on, you know, the climate change and the biodiversity loss, as Jocelyn pointed out. So I just wonder whether there's a focus of your activity going forward around how do we engage with consumers on this in a way that's not a blame that it's all their fault.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, so, and this is where I think there is a kind of gap in the policy framework. So we've got excellent government schemes like the extended producer responsibility and deposit return schemes and stuff coming online in this country and other countries around the world. And then we've got the kind of fixed capitalism because everything else about our culture, every advertisement you see on telly, every advertisement you see on a bus stop, everything, you know, tabloid article about what celebrities are wearing and where they went on holidays, every single thing is bombarding us from every direction. Buy more, buy more, buy how much stuff you can buy. And so I'm not sure that that's something that governments can fix. That's a cultural thing about how we've decided to live. We've decided to measure our self-worth, our status, our relationship to others with how much we can buy. And I think that that's something that we need to change at a cultural level. But I think that there's a lot of initiatives around in communities in particular around making this change. For example, where I live in Leith in Edinburgh, we have something called a tool co-op. A tools cooperative. So the idea is that you don't need to own a tool if you have use of it. So for £20 a year, you can join the it's a tool library, and you can borrow a tool whenever you need to do whatever job that you need. And in fact, they have a money than you would be able to have if you kept them in your own garden shed where they would get rusty and covered in spiders. They're always in good condition. You can borrow them, use them, and give them back. So I think there's something around, rather than having pride in ownership, let's make sure we have a right to use. And that probably is with transportation and, with housing as well. We have a right to use these things. We don't need to own them. But I also think there's an element of designing to last, taking in our repair skills. I sanded this table down and look, isn't it great now? Or I mended this, or I altered this bit of clothing. I added a feature to it. Isn't it lovely that it's still nice? And so rather than this, where again, say, well, I've worn this for 10 years, isn't it still in good condition? So there is something that we can all do culturally. And I think that this is where community groups, religious groups, school groups, all these things who do have a different value set, who do primarily value the human experience, who value relationships, can really be kind of loud and proud about it, saying, well, we could tell you that it's much more important to spend time with your family and friends and to learn useful skills than it is to go out and buy stuff. So hopefully we can have that cultural lot from capitalism, which is just telling us to buy. And I myself don't have the answers to that, but I would be very interested to hear what fits in that space between, government initiated circular economy schemes and fixed capitalism, because that's the space we need to really get into and find some good policy in there.
Yeah, okay, you slowed up a bit there, but yeah, well, for the thing about fixing capitalism, we do have Tim Jackson speaking later in our event, who is the author of quite a few books around just that, with some ideas around fixing capitalism and particularly thinking about consumption and what sits behind that behaviour. So yeah, I look forward to that. And I think, so you touched upon skills. I was going to just reflect on that. I mean, that is in your title as well, your job title, Minister, in terms of green skills. And again, there's quite often a sense that there's this green jobs, there's a section of the society that are going to have green jobs and they're going to kind of fix all of this, and the rest of us are just going to carry on doing what we're doing. But what you're talking there about, how do we embed different types of skills in everything that we do, in terms of repair, remanufacturing, repurposing, even just, we've done a lot of work looking at this, and even, discussions around how do we actually empower or upskill people in business, business leaders and the boardroom level to really adopt strategies that are far more circular and far more sustainable going forward. So before I come back to you, Minister, but maybe Josh, you could talk a little bit about that in terms of, how skills are being, or the adaptation and the rolling out of skills in the circular economy globally are doing. It's something we don't hear a lot about, and I'd be interested if there was particular countries or cities or something that we're really focusing on as the skills revolution in this space.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because actually it does link to what Minister Slater was saying about those hubs and communities, those repair cafes, those tool libraries that also serve as places where exchanges of skills are happening. And it's been the case, we've seen that in Germany, we've seen that in Austria, we've seen that in the Netherlands, certainly. Networks of repair cafes or tool libraries that really become places where people can get to grips with taking stuff apart, with repairing it, but also helping share those skills that a lot of people do have, but are not valued enough or are not visible enough. But that also means that there is a necessity for the economics to work, because linearity is very much embedded in the system. And when it's cheap to produce units and to, at some stage, not look at the externalities in terms of pricing those in, and leaving that burden on society as a whole, there's also an enabling factor that policy can play a critical role in. It is a cultural thing, I agree. The mindsets have been shaped, but consumerism at some point had to be sold to consumers. It's not a natural thing necessarily. So there are ways of reverting that as well and saying, okay, those business models that we talk about, product as a service, all sounds really good. And we've been talking about that for a few years now, but where are they actually? Are they supported? Is there a specific tax break for repair activities like we've seen in Sweden, for instance, where they've cut the VAT rate on certain repair activities? The jury is still out on the result, but it's an experiment. It's really important to have it. And we worked on a paper last year called the Universal Circular Economy Policy Goals, 5 of them. One really is about making the economics work for the circular economy. So for the outcome of having value retention strategies and strategies that also have a positive impact on ecosystems, for instance. And it's about targeting the incentives and the disincentives towards that circular outcome. And as you say, and if some of us are going to have so-called circular jobs, and I'd like to have a definition of that at some point, but we don't challenge the fundamentals of the system, we're going to end up with circular economy plugins on the linear model, and that's never going to work. So the skills, remanufacturing for sure, circular design, absolutely critical, material sciences, absolutely critical as well, selection of those materials and the way that they are used and they are put together within a product with a view to recover them, repurpose them, or feed them back to natural system where applicable. That is absolutely critical, but the business model side of things as well. How do you create that circularity when a company looks at their product as a material banks, and that changes the accounting rules as well? It's on the balance sheet, a stock is a negative most of the time, why should that be? All of these things are absolutely critical. How do you upscale, or how do you start training people who are going to enter the financial sector to look at the positive impact, a life cycle analysis with positive impacts, and factor that into financial decisions as well? I mean, the list, I could go on, but you see the width and the breadth of the competencies that we need are absolutely critical. And that is also a key role for government to look at, to create the right skilling mechanisms to push for circular economy across the curriculum in education, not as a standalone topic, as a cross-cutting theme.
Yeah, so without putting you on the spot, Minister, I mean, obviously your other role is in the green skills space, and I know that list as well. And sometimes I've said it's very, in my view, it's very similar to kind of digitally enabling society. Everybody, there's an expectation that we should all be digitally literate. And there's also a massive government initiative here in Scotland, I'm sure, other parts of the world as well, to embed, digital competencies across every part of society. Because there'll be, pardon the phrase, geeks who really need to understand the digital technology and all of that sort of stuff. But we all need to be digitally enabled now. Smartphones, you name it. Ordering things online, participating in society is almost, you need to have a degree of digital competence. And in some respects, what you're saying, Josh, is about the circular economy. It needs the same approach. It needs to be embedded in everything that we do, no matter what job, what other part of society, even as an individual and a citizen going about their leisure or whatever, not just their work. There needs to be a degree of awareness around the circular economy. So I guess, Minister, just do you have any views about how we can really accelerate some of that skills development in circular space within the green skills revolution?
I think that's really interesting, and I really appreciate the suggestion, because I asked for suggestions. I think that's a really good suggestion about making repair and reuse literacy a thing that we think about. How literate is many people come through our colleges and universities doing that kind of design work? Is that integrated into the courses? So I think that's kind of the third strand. And I one of the things that I'm currently working on is a definition, to put to my portfolio encompasses. And I think the deconstruction side, the land restoration and restoration of seabed sort of side and marine environment side, but then there's the circular economy set as well. So I think those things, and absolutely, I think that's a useful thing. So I guess from my point of view, my role, we need to come up with a definition that we can agree on, and then do some work on where those skills are lacking, how we give people those skills. And I think this country who have those skills, do we help people transition those skills to people who are mid-career? So that I see sort of three strands of bringing those skills into Scotland and making sure we have them as part of our economy. And then we'll have to work backwards and see how we make those three skills work and obviously happen. But certainly starting with the definition is literacy on something we should definitely think about going forward.
Okay. All right, thank you. Just obviously conscious of the time now, we've just got a few minutes left, so I was probably just interested in any final reflections, and again, not to, looking for some advice, I guess, possibly more than anything, Josh, from you about, from your view looking into Scotland, so to speak, is there any specific advice you could give us, both Zero Waste Scotland as well as the Minister and society more general? I mean, obviously, is there areas that you think that we could really easy wins for us, or further easy wins in terms of accelerating some of the circular economy activity that would be useful to hear?
Well, that certainly is a big question, and I'll be speaking under your control. And as you mentioned, Iain, we've been working with Zero Waste Scotland for a very long time now, and we've seen the evolution. So I think, first of all, it's fantastic that the work that you've done has risen so far up the agenda in Scotland, and it's really taken off now. Maybe something that links those skills and the infrastructure as well, because there is in Scotland, of course, a lot of there's a strong agricultural sector, so anything that can be put to use when it comes to regenerative agricultural practices that sequester carbon in the soil, that foster the health of ecosystem, is obviously something that should be a point of focus as a priority. But I was also thinking about all the shipyards and all the infrastructure that does exist, all that industrial wealth of equipment. How do you match that with skills and maybe start to repurpose that? And I know it's been happening towards the creation and the making simply of the infrastructure that will power the new economy. So how do we turn that into potential wind turbine factories or centers of maintenance for hydro turbines, or all of these new things that really do need a strong industrial infrastructure that may have been, evolution of the economy means that they've been decommissioned. Some of them have been put on furlough, so to speak. How do you match that with those skills that need to be fostered as well, the maintenance, the repair, and use that wealth of equipment that already exists in order to propel Scotland into the next era and play on that innovation potential that the circular economy offers? Well, just two quick things, but far from me to be giving anyone advice about how they should run their economy.
That's fine, and that kind of mirrors the whole thing that the circular economy is not starting again, it's not reinventing the wheel, sticking what you've already got, so that heritage, all of that infrastructure, absolutely. So that does chime. So anyway, some final thoughts from yourself, Minister, on what you've heard?
Well, I'm excited about what you just said, because that's exactly my thoughts. The other part of my portfolio that we haven't spoken about today is the Green Industrial Strategy, which sits with me. And that's pretty much exactly what I have in mind, as a reinvigoration of manufacturing and industry. as you say, we have the history of that Scotland's economy is based on it and using that full skill set. So I'm excited that you feel that that's part of the same brief. It makes my portfolio seem more coherent than perhaps it might otherwise have done. But that's definitely a priority for me.
Great. Okay, so I am now getting a countdown. I think that's now how it's going to work. So thank you both. I know I've had a few technical issues there, but it's been really first-class discussion. Thanks for your input. Thanks for your time. Obviously, look forward to continuing to work with both of you into the future. And yeah, thanks again. Great start to the day.
Thank you very much, and see you in Glasgow.